because we have such an eminent set of panelists with us to talk about a topic that is important in so many different ways, with the potential to impact our lives in so many different ways. And that topic is a global vision towards intelligent cities, where we will discuss best practices as well as what it means to be smart as well as sustainable when it comes to cities. And for this fireside chat today, we have with us Your Excellency, Ambassador Gillon, Honorable Jinu Shiriati, First Secretary, Trade, Energy and Infrastructure, British High Commission, Honorable Soren Kanek, Minister, Councillor and Head of Trade, Royal Danish Embassy, Denmark, and Honorable Ms. Camilla Kinston Rai, Councillor, Sustainable Urbanization, Water and Air, Delegation of the European Union to India. Thank you once again for gracing the stage today with your presence. I'm very excited to kick this discussion off. And what I can do is maybe start with a bit of context setting before I pose the questions to our speakers. We know that cities are a very complex and interconnected system, right? And they're constantly growing. Today, more than half of the world's population resides in urban areas. In India, that's around 1/3 of our population that resides in cities, but contributes to more than 2/3 of our GDP. Right? With urbanization, people are moving from rural areas to urban centers in search for better incomes, better standards of living. And in doing so, the economy is moving from a traditionally agrarian economy to one that is service sector based, and whose contribution to GDP is also rising. And recognizing that urbanization is a growing trend, the national government launched this Smart Cities mission in 2015 that selected 100 cities for redevelopment through multiple rounds of competition. And the intent is to provide the citizens with core infrastructure as well as decent quality of life, as well as a clean and sustainable environment. I think that's one of the core objectives of this mission. Now, given the complex and interconnected nature of cities, the scope for innovation and digital transformation is also quite huge, right? Whether it comes to data or decisions that can make a city more sustainable, as well as resilient, as well as adaptive and agile, all of which is quite important today. So with this, I'd like to start with a common question to all of our speakers, which is, when we talk about a smart city, it typically conjures up images of high-tech infrastructure, connected systems, smart mobility. All of these are important. But there are also other essential dimensions beyond that, such as healthcare, quality of life, social participation, public safety, economic contribution, as well as equity. So what, according to you, is the most essential attribute or a set of attributes that characterize a smart city? So maybe we can start with Ambassador Gillon and move this way till it circles back to me.
So I think when you look at this exhibition, you see that it is very wide, the definition of what is a smart city. And I'm not sure there is one thing that can be the governing thing of smart city. At the end of the day, we are trying to make the services to the citizens better, the quality of life better. And it changes from city to city because in most developed world, there are no new cities. These are expansions of existing cities and infrastructure, so it's built many times layer on a layer. It's not planned. There are new cities that try to plan from zero, from scratch, but then mostly it's layer on layer, and that's why we are trying to give all aspects of life, better services, better health, better ability of movement, transportation, more efficient. Everything is relevant there. Cleaner air, which is coming out of all these. If less cars are traveling, more public transportation accessibility, less pollution, etc., etc.
First of all, thank you so much for having us here, and congratulations for hosting the 80 Smart Cities Expo. Great to be here. As His Excellency mentioned, I don't think there is a one fit for all or one definition of smart cities, but there is an overarching mission of the smart city, and I think that is to improve and to optimize the city's function, and as His Excellency says, is to drive economic growth and while improving the quality of life of the citizens. So smart cities are those that, in my opinion, that provide economic development, and even safety is a factor, I think, for improving the life of a citizen. And I think technology plays a key role, but technology is just part of the smart cities, and technology is just a means to an end. And I think, but as I say, the quality of the life of citizen is one element of the smart cities and one overarching ambition for smart cities, in my opinion.
Thank you. I agree that technology is not only the answer. I think you need to have both government, academia, and private companies working together to create safe, sustainable, and livable cities. And you need to do urban planning in a way in which you are encouraging sustainability, which means that you make it more attractive to be on a bicycle. We see that in Copenhagen with separate traffics that are faster when you ride on your bike. You need to encourage saving of water. You need to have proper insulation and save on energy, and basically drive in a way where, as we are reducing the greenhouse gas emissions and other things, we are also making the city more livable. So I think it's about a higher degree of urban planning, taking in all stakeholders in order to ensure that you get to the end goal that you want.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you so much for this question. So what I would like to say about smart cities is that it's important to synchronize definitions. So now, of course, we are talking about smart city. What do we mean by this? So definitions, when we say sustainability, when we say livability, so what do we mean by it? So a smart city can mean different things for different people, but also from different countries. Sometimes we maybe tend to think about smart city as something with technology, which I think it is, but it's more than that. It is definitely the human dimension as well, because the smart city has to be a place where it is a good place to live for the people, and therefore the human dimension is very important in this regard. And the smart city can also be about urban sustainability. So just to, basically when we talk about these definitions, it's always useful to synchronize them, to understand and talk about what do we mean by them, each of us. As well as when we say smart cities and solutions for smart cities and implementation for smart cities, I think one important point is to think about the local context. We may want to bring global solutions to the local context, but we have to understand the local context, which can be different from Delhi, from Mumbai, from Brussels, from any city actually. So the local context and the solutions we want to bring into the smart city, we have to keep in mind as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all of the speakers, and I think all very relevant and very important points. But it's also interesting that all of you touched upon quality of life, safety and sustainability in one way or another in your remarks. So maybe good to start with this whole aspect of sustainability in terms of how do we move from the traditional understanding of what a smart city is to what we can call a sustainable smart city. And by that I mean a city that not only uses digital and technology to improve the living experience, as well as the efficiency of operations and services, and this is typically what we understand of a smart city, to a city that ensures that it meets the need of the present as well as future generations with respect to economic, social, as well as environmental and cultural aspects. So my first question would be to Ambassador Gillon. Israel is famously known as the startup nation of the world. It's been a market leader in developing technology solutions ranging from, it could be residential security systems to water, air, waste, healthcare technologies. And we know that Israel has developed a very unique ecosystem approach towards its smart city technology, with a unique focus on collaboration between government and private sector, as well as between B2B, as well as private entrepreneurs and local governments, as well as civil society institutes. So what can we learn from Israel's experience, and how can we collaborate further to catalyze the startup ecosystem in India to contribute more effectively to the smart cities agenda?
Yeah. First of all, we have to remember that the scale between Israel, a country of less than 10 million people, and India are incomparable. And I think that India has different demands and different solutions of its own and the ability to arrive at solutions. But of course, cooperation with Israeli companies and Israeli ecosystem is very much desirable, and we already do some stuff, not enough. Our approach is an approach of layers again. So we give the basic digital capability to connectivity to the citizen, and then different startups will come with different solutions. So, for example, on transportation, Waze, a company that is now mainly the basis of Google Navigate, because they were bought by Google to give the technology that they use the data, the travel time, the congestion of traffic and everything that they take from the user and use it in order to inform other users in a sophisticated way what is the best route to take. And this is only one example. And this comes into the digital capabilities, or others who do move it, who are doing the optimal way to move in public transportation, which is the best combination, the fastest, the cheapest, whatever you want to do. We work together already, for example, with a very interesting futuristic project, which is managing drones. In the future, our assumption is that there will be, at any given time, thousands of drones, tens of thousands of drones in the cities flying above by different operators. So one will be bringing medicine to your home, and another would be shifting pizza to someone else. And how do you deconflict them? How do you manage it? How do you make it making sure the two drones will not collide and fall on someone's head and, God forbid, kill him? So we are doing, Niti Ayog is leading here an interagency on the Indian side. We did already some tests in the US. US is also part of the project that we are leading. In Tel Aviv, there was already a test with 3,000 drones in parallel to see how you manage the system. So this is another example. I think that there is not enough cooperation between private sector in our two countries. Different of directions of way of where they are, each one of them. But the good thing is the fact that most system integrators of India are represented at least in scouting in Israel. So Tata, Tech Mahindra, all the big companies, they have in the field, Reliance, they have some kind or another of representation of scouting. But we have to work much more. Also, I will finish by saying that now, also in I2U2, we added Israel offered to do a smart water city. To take a city, probably it will be in the UAE. I2U2, of course, is India, Israel, USA, and UAE. And the project would be to plan from zero, from scratch, a smart water city. How do you perfect the water systems? We are doing it here, by the way. Our only water attaché in the world is in our embassy. And what he does is bring companies to do integrative water planning for different places to use the best way the water. Israel reuses today 90% of its water for agriculture use. And in this sense and other senses in water management, we are world leaders. And what we are bringing here is mainly planning rather than execution. Execution is done by Indian companies because they can do it better, cheaper, and faster.
Okay, thank you so much. And I completely agree. I think, Ambassador Gilon and Ms. Ray both talked about the fact that the solution for different countries is quite different and different cities is quite different, given the challenges that you're trying to solve for are quite different, and that the development imperatives are quite different. And you specifically touched upon, traffic and congestion and water, both common issues that, that India and several other developing countries face, typically because, water is consumed within industry, but also within the agriculture sector, which is a big contributor to employment and GDP within India. Specifically, if you talk about traffic and congestion, I think there are a lot of startup success stories, like you mentioned, in Israel, for example, solutions like Waze and Move It, which rely on crowdsourcing technology to minimize congestion on roads, to Waycare, which utilizes big data to predict hazards, to EFO, which are parking solutions. So I think there's a lot we can draw in terms of the experience from Israel. But speaking of success stories, I'd like to pose the next question to Ms. Janice Chiriati. London has often been ranked as one of the smartest cities in the world, and Europe is home to a lot of other smart cities as well, whether it's Paris or Oslo or Berlin or Amsterdam or Copenhagen, and they all fare well across all the different dimensions of sustainability when it comes to human capital or social cohesion or environment or mobility and transformation. So given these strengths, what are some of the possible opportunities where India can collaborate with the UK when it comes to technology, or even for that matter, mobilizing finance or perhaps infrastructure that can enable that the transition to happen to smart cities?
Thank you so much. To answer this question, I would like to highlight the India-UK 2030 roadmap that our both Prime Ministers agreed in 2021. And in that cooperation, they highlighted an areas of cooperation. We already have around more than £30 billion of trade between UK and India. That's the latest stats, but we can always do more. And of course, technology and finance are always enabling factors for more cooperation. But just to highlight some of the areas that the roadmap highlighted are in areas of health, climate, clean energy, cybersecurity, and space, and also research and innovations are some of the areas that highlighted as part of this roadmap. In terms of the financing, we have UK Export Finance, which is government credit agency which support exporters exporting to the UK, providing financing with more than 4 billion of risk cover for India, and with £2 billion of direct lending facilities for clean growth projects that are dedicated globally. And then there is another one is British Investment International, which is the development finance arm of the UK government, and they are investing into climate projects and climate change related projects as well. So we are also working in projects like a smart and sustainable city, promoting climate action and disaster risk reduction in cities. And also we are also working on areas of urban innovation as well, where we are working on building information modeling system. So there are a lot of areas that we can share and exchange knowledge and expertise between UK and India. We already have, I think, more than 10 companies within these sectors are exhibiting in our pavilion in the Smart Cities Expo. So they are all providing expertise and looking at partnership with Indian companies, as well as for participating in government projects.
Thank you. I think I agree. EU is a very big market for us in India, and regulation-wise, any regulation in the EU typically does affect us significantly. When you talked about climate, for example, the CBAM or the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism and other taxation regimes, Indian industry is also trying to gear up for what these regulations might, what might be coming in the future. But you also talked about enabling export incentives. I think all of that is very important in building this cooperation and collaboration between the countries. But I'd like to turn to another country that's known for its smart cities, right? And maybe I'll address my next question to Mr. Soren Kanik. Denmark is popularly known for nurturing the smartest cities in the world, whether it's Copenhagen, which is ranked as the safest place as per the cities index of the EIU, which covers critical aspects around digital security, health security, infrastructure security, personal security, as well as environment security. And this is quite inspiring for the rest of the world. But even beyond safety, cities like Copenhagen are pioneers when it comes to solid waste management or recycling, and other social performance indicators such as gender parity, empowering policies, health, education, and social security parameters. So my next question to you, sir, is how did Denmark make public-private partnerships and social collaboration its strength towards enabling the green and smart city transition? And you talked about collaboration a bit in your opening remarks as well.
That's a good question. I think that public-private partnerships are essential to the progress of Denmark's green transition for decades. There's an old saying that is, whoever have the problem also own the solution. Well, everybody has a problem, so we need to have government, businesses, academia, innovation to work together to develop the solutions. We saw very early on in the last time we had an energy crisis in the 70s, the government and the industries got together and wanted to ensure that we had our own energy. So we started up the wind industry in Denmark. We saw we had depleting aquifers. So we worked together to more than half the consumption of water per capita over a 40-year period, while tripling the GDP. I think that we need to get out of our boxes and work together. We need to have businesses coming in and coming up with solutions. So if they get a clear guideline that we need to reduce water, energy, emissions, or other things, the guidelines that they do together with companies, getting the right scientists and innovation in and academia, will then bring in the solution and then have a long-term plan. So nothing is happening from day to day. You need to work and have a long-term strategy as how do you put it in and then work together on it.
Great. And Jan, just to share here that one of my favorite books is called Abundance, which talks about the fact that whenever there's a global crisis, the world tends to come together in ways that there are abundance of the solutions, in the world. So I feel like this is a great success and story and inspirational story around how you've built the success story for Denmark for so many of your cities. And as a woman and as a mother also, I feel like it's heartening to see countries like Denmark or Sweden who are recognized as some of the sort of best countries to raise a child, or best countries for women residents. Given the high degree of sort of institutional support that you provide in terms of the government-sponsored health programs, childcare, education, as well as the cultural values that are tied to, social trust, community, a lot of which is very common with us in India, right? Given our sort of family-centric approach to society. But having talked about international best practices and collaboration more broadly, I'd also like to turn to Ms. Rai, Consular Delegation of the EU to India. You have such a rich experience of strengthening India's urban development sector programs and facilitating city-to-city connects between the city of, for example, Udaipur and Aarhus in Denmark in your previous assignment in India. Given this experience, whether from the urban planning perspective or the quality of life perspective, what are the best practices that you would like to share from our EU counterparts for us to learn? Also keen to know if you can share how much emphasis has been accorded to water and air quality within the smart cities criteria of the EU cities, given your interest in this area as well.
Thank you so much. Yes, I will think about it from 2 points of view. First of all, between the EU and Government of India, that is Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, we have a partnership on smarter sustainable urbanization. This is a long-term partnership, a very strong partnership from 2017. It is agreed at the highest level between the Government of India and the EU. So this gives a very good framework for working together between the EU and India. And EU, of course, meaning 27 member states. So the EU and India, we have a shared vision on a smarter, sustainable urbanization with the benefit of all people, all citizens, all people. We work in this partnership on a number of areas. Yes, we do work on water. We do work on solid waste. We do work on investments in sustainable urbanization. We work on urban planning. We work on housing, urban mobility. It's a range of topics we work together on. I mean, you gave the example of city-to-city cooperation between city of Aarhus in Denmark, city of Udaipur, of course, in India. Here, what I would actually like to say is that when we talk about city-to-city cooperation, again, I would like to go back to the point I made earlier on. Important to understand the local context. And also another dimension to it is that we can learn from each other. We can learn from you, meaning cities in India can learn from us. We can learn from you, actually. You can learn from us. So that is the kind of spirit. It is a partnership. So we work together. But one point I would like to mention here is that in our latest India-EU Urban Forum, which we held in February this year, organized by Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs and the EU, we focused very much on implementation. Because this is where we think we should put our energy into. And when we say best practices, we had asked our panelists to each bring a photo on smart city. What does smart city mean? What does water mean? What does urban mobility mean to that panelist? And when we put these photos together, we saw a set of excellent solutions. Excellent solutions on urban mobility from cities in India, on water from cities in India, and on smart cities, of course. And what we discussed here was that to understand how they became excellent solutions and by whom. So it is a focus on the process rather than the product. So I think this is one message I would like to give. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for highlighting areas where we can work together. But you also talked about differing development imperatives across different countries when you started. And although I feel like a lot of these narratives could be differently framed, some of the common outcomes we're trying to get to are quite similar. So for example, in our case in India, given we have poor air quality across many of our cities today, air pollution is in fact a major driver towards this transformation towards smart cities. And in fact, climate change is seen as something of a co-benefit instead. Which is quite a different approach compared to many developed countries, where perhaps climate change is one of the major drivers as well. For example, both EU and India have full-fledged missions of achieving 100 climate smart cities. But the EU has an additional component that relates to climate neutrality as an objective. India hasn't specifically taken that as an objective within its smart cities program, but the perspective is quite an important one and frankly quite important from the future readiness perspective as well. So I would love to hear your views, Ms. Ray, just as a follow-up question, on key practices or systems that can help achieving climate neutrality within smart cities. As a follow-up question to Ms. Ray, and then I'll look to you as well.
For me, okay. Thank you on this. Well, I did talk about the partnership on smart and sustainable urbanization between the EU and the government of India. And one of the areas we work on as well is city climate action. And of course, India, there is the Climate Smart Cities Assessment Framework. So this is already some work, a lot of work going on this in this field of climate action in cities by ministry, by National Institute of Urban Affairs. So when we talk about city climate action plans for cities, somehow we are talking about things which are not really new. It's already what we are working on or what cities are working on. Because what does a climate action plan means? It basically means you work on solid waste management, we work on energy efficiency in buildings, we look at the energy sector, we look at the transportation sector. So this is all work already going on. But maybe when we put it together in the climate action plans for city, it comes together And maybe that is the difference. It becomes holistic in a way. But it also gives a new challenges or new opportunities, because once you have the City Climate Action Plan, there was a very good presentation from Mumbai on their City Climate Action Plan. It shows that in order to implement, in order to monitor, maybe 30, maybe 40 different agencies, departments need to work together. So maybe this is the new opportunity. But we're already working on sectors, so this is the dimension on city climate action. Thank you.
Thank you, and I absolutely agree. I think we're working on various solutions across sectors, but it does, like you said, need to come together. We have to be able to develop a common sort of aspiration around what the sum of the parts might needs to look like in the future. And since we're talking about climate smart cities, I'd like to retrace the steps back from the speakers and direct my next question to Mr. Soren. Ambitious climate neutrality goals are part of some of the core elements of smart cities within Denmark. Both Copenhagen and Aarhus have CO2 carbon neutrality targets by 2025 and 2030, which is quite ambitious. So how is your government facilitating that ambitious low carbon transition? And what are some of the challenges that you foresee in doing so?
Well, last year, the city of Copenhagen actually postponed its zero target beyond 2025. However, our capital has reduced greenhouse gas emissions by 71% since 2010. And all municipalities in Denmark has joined a voluntary DK 2020 program, which unites Danish cities around the Paris Agreement's compatible climate plans. As for the governance, the green transition, most Danish cities of a reasonable size have elaborate climate plans and roadmaps that interact with our ambitious national climate target of cutting greenhouse gases by 70% by 2030 compared to 1990. So it's all about starting out small, having the smaller units doing their sustainable plans, and then following it up with clear targets and milestones in order to drive the emissions down and increase the sustainable footprint.
Great. And I think, 71% is a significant reduction in absolute terms. I think with a lot of in the developing country context, we're still talking in intensity terms because we're still growing and we're still setting our manufacturing base. So a lot of different conflicting development imperatives that we're working on, but it's a lot.
I actually don't see that sustainability has to be something that costs anything. We have within the last 30 years more than doubled our GDP while keeping our energy consumption at the same level, while driving renewable energy up to about 70% of all energy. So I think there is a lot of job and there is a lot of sustainabilities and business to be made out of green growth, which I also think is evident in the new budget coming out from India with a focus on creating green jobs. A good example of that is, for instance, that we had a harbor in Denmark that used to be the biggest fishing harbor 50 years ago. Then 30 years ago, it became an oil and natural gas harbor, and now is the biggest harbor for offshore wind in Europe. Every time we made a change, we created more jobs and more innovative solutions. So I think we need to be careful in saying that just because you grow the economy, you also have to grow emissions. There is solutions available, and I think that the government coming out with a new budget here see the potential in green and sustainable jobs and the green economy.
Absolutely. And I think today we have considerable research to show that it's possible to decouple economic growth and emissions. And I think with India as well, we have a huge focus on renewable energy. At the current moment, the power sector is the biggest contributor to emissions. But we know, given the sort of bold ambitions we have on the table for India, and fairly sort of moonshot ambitions, the power sector, the industry sector will probably overtake the power sector when it comes to emissions in a few decades. So absolutely agree with you. But aside from climate neutrality ambitions, Denmark has struck quite a balance when it comes to, and we talked about this, family-friendly ways and gender parity as well. So drawing from this thread, I'd like to turn again to Ms. Shriati on, as a woman leader in this space. Would you want to highlight any examples of how UK has worked on making its cities more inclusive? Or in fact, any success stories where women played a critical role in this transition in strengthening the smart city ecosystem? And as a follow-up, would you like to share any thoughts around how India can bring in the multiplier effect by involving women in the workforce for smart city development?
Thank you, and I think it's a great subject that I'm very passionate about, and thank you for putting the spotlight on that need. I think we have seen a recent report from World Economic Forum that says although like 7 out of 10 women will be living in the cities by 2050, the cities are still not basically are not women friendly, and they're not providing that gender diversification and not meeting the demands of women, especially that I'm talking about here. So what the solution to that? I think we need more women at the kind of decision-making chain. I think we need more women at designers and one women at in the positions that they can change and design the city. So I think cities are still not designed for women because they are designed and built by men, and as a result some of the needs for women are being overlooked. So how we can address that issues is by diversifying that decision making and including women and in those jobs. I'm talking about the UK. In the UK, we are not also perfect. So if you consider there are only 3% of the women are basically attracted to the jobs in tech sector, are only 25% or quarter of the people who are employed in the tech sectors are women. So we need to do more to attract more women and girls into the basically in the subjects that would attract them to be employed in tech sectors. I think by creating role models, I think having role models or having mentors or sponsors for girls that could get attracted to those jobs, we could address those issues. And to give you an example of some of the measures that we are taking or to address these issues in the UK, I think by introducing the Equality Act 2010, a lot of local authorities are now adopting measures or basically introducing policies to diversify, to making their policies more inclusive. And for example, Glasgow, for example, is placing the need of women at the heart of the town planning, making the UK's first feminist city. And the needs of women is now central to all aspects of the planning, decision making, to make sure that women can live safely and their needs are taken into account. And I think for India, similar to the UK, I think there are things that we could learn and share knowledge together around basically introducing more STEM subjects to attracting girls to more engineering and tech jobs, and we could do more together to support women in tech as well.
Absolutely. And I think I'm glad you touched upon women in decision-making roles. A lot of regulations and policy in India is also geared towards, especially on disclosure that we have today on ESG disclosure. It's forcing private sector companies to think about, gender representation, for example, on the board. Some of the important positions, the decision-making positions within the company. But completely agree. I think the situation is quite similar in India when it comes to women being part of technology landscape. I come from an engineering college, and we have a very small proportion of women within engineering colleges. So I think there's a lot more to do in terms of expanding that. If we move beyond urban centers, it's, that gender digital divide is also pretty large. So how do we ensure that women find access to the education, awareness that can help them improve the quality of their lives by enabling them to be able to access technology as well. So very important conversation. But coming back to Ambassador Gilon, and since we're talking about quality of life, we're talking about women, and we're talking about citizens. Tel Aviv has been exceptionally sort of responsive to its citizens in terms of listening to what people need and designing their smart cities around that. So maybe it has a natural advantage as being, the business center or the test bed for a lot of the startups that exist in the country. But given that you're so far ahead, what would you be able to throw some light on? What are some of the challenges and issues Israel faced while implementing smart city solutions, especially in Tel Aviv, and how were those challenges overcome?
Yes, Tel Aviv in Smart City Expo in Barcelona in 2014 won a prize for its decision to focus on the citizens and not on the infrastructure. And first of all, the cost of changing infrastructure is much higher than the digital. It's not that we don't do infrastructure, it's not that we don't do machine to machine to improve, but it's more about the digital. This is the secret. And this makes it also affordable, because one of the challenges is cost. And if you already build your system around the smartphone that practically everyone has today, it's much easier. And it gives also different startups and companies the ability to build their own applications that will join this digital services online that the citizens get. So cost is one element. Another element is that also cyber. I think that it's not touched here, but the more smart we become, the more vulnerable we are also from the point of view of cyber attacks and whatnot. And when you use the cellular phone, you have already one layer of protection because the cellular phones are protected in a way, and it makes it a little bit easier. So I think that by going a lot on digital, you can both make it cheaper, relatively cheaper, more accessible for people, and you can make it a little bit safer. But regardless, safety and counter cyber or cyber protection are extremely important, because Israel, for example, was attacked less than a year ago by Iran, according to what we know, in order to play with the water, control of the water in the north of Israel, because we put materials into the water to make them cleaner and drinkable. But if you put too much of that, it might become also deadly. So this protection is extremely important. The more sophisticated, the more vulnerable we are.
Absolutely, and I agree. I think safety is key across multiple dimensions, including, as you talked about, cybersecurity when it comes to governance as well. But since we're talking about challenges, maybe one last open question to all of our speakers as we come to closure. So I'm curious, when a particular city is referred to as a smart city, it automatically becomes an aspirational city for its neighboring cities, right? And it's almost like a goal for citizens who live in nearby cities to be able to migrate to those centers. How do you typically look at or address this challenge of migration or disruption or the growth of these cities and the application of services, given this kind of migration that happens or disruption that happens, or any other challenges that you'd like to highlight? I know we talked about challenges a little bit already, but any sort of challenges that we haven't covered so far that you'd want to sort of highlight in terms of what we should consider when we're planning for a smart city?
Again, in India, the scalability is totally different. Israel is 90% urbanized already, much higher than most of the world. So we don't have this phenomena. And again, people in smaller cities, they are looking for quality of life So again, you want also in the big city quality of life, but some people stay outside of the big cities because they want the quality of life. And if you are able to create infrastructure in a small country like Israel, that people can live outside of the cities and make their entrance into the city easier for jobs, for work, for entertainment, whatever they need from the bigger cities, you're okay. And again, when you are digital, when you're doing everything digital, also a visitor can enjoy the same things that a citizen can enjoy. Because again, it's all about your mobile phone, your smartphone. We don't have the phenomena of immigration. We have immigration to Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, the biggest cities, but it's not a huge phenomena. And when 90% of your population anyhow lives in cities, it's a different situation. But of course, there is a big gap between the services you will get in the bigger cities and the services you will get in the smaller cities. Some of the smaller cities are doing very well, but it's not a reason to immigrate. Again, people are looking for different people are looking for different things in their life. Some people are looking to be under the radar, to be quieter. One of the problems that we face, of course, with being digital and smart is the fact that our data is accessible also. So our privacy is jeopardized. And it's a thing that it's not something we can minimize it, but we cannot fight it, because big data or collecting our data in general is part of the ways to servicing us better. Maybe people are making money on that. It's part of life. So, each city will find its own DNA and its own quality, and what should be smart of the city, what should be simpler in the city. I think there is no one recipe for that.
Just to add to what His Excellency mentioned, I think going back to the point of quality of life, I think, and the first question that we discussed is about the smart cities and definition of the smart city, people looking for better quality of life, and that may drive some of the issues that you mentioned around immigration from maybe to smart cities. And I think in the UK, for example, the local authorities and cities are competing to attract talent and developing and basically fighting for investment, whether it is foreign direct investment or it's from the central government. That's why they are trying to increase the quality of life to bring people into the city. And they may not bring challenges, but it also bring opportunities as well. So immigration is not always a bad thing. So I think it can bring opportunities as well.
I think it's a very interesting concept. I think it's about creating opportunities for people to be in the cities. We see in India, you still have a very large percentage of the population living in rural area. But we also see, same as we do in Denmark, that the young people, they migrate either to the cities or to abroad in order to create a better life, leaving the cities with old people and children. Now, what we also saw during the pandemic was that a lot of the people that had gone and worked in the tech sector and other things, when they had to work from home, they came back to the villages. And I know a lot of the companies are now having a hard time getting them back because they're quite fond of living cheap and comfortable in the villages, and they don't really like going back and pay the rent of Delhi and Bangalore. So I think the pandemic showed us that proximity is not physical, but is also digital. So we now saw during the pandemic that we could do everything online, and it doesn't really matter as long as we have a working internet connection, we can work from anywhere. So I think that we need to use these learnings that we had from the pandemic to basically do a more inclusive. Of course, it's easier to drive sustainability in well-organized cities than in the rural areas, but I think that we need to use the whole area as well and create and keep life in the rural areas, both in Denmark and in India, by making opportunities available for them there.
I like to say two points, and that is about the mode of working. How are we working? First one I want to mention that the implementation, again, I think it's important, implementation of smart and sustainable urbanization. From the EU side, we work through the EU Global Gateway. The EU Global Gateway, it is a template of the EU to build resilient connections with the people and the world. So I think focusing on the modes of working. And another example on this is to work on what I would call outcome-based urbanization, that we shift the direction and work towards outcome-based urbanization. And what does this mean? It means that we move away from what we may want to call activity trap, meaning if we work on projects, we often plan them a few years before they're going to be implemented. It takes some years to implement. So let us think differently here. Let us move away from focusing on the activities, which we somehow decided a few years back. Rather, we want to focus on the outcome. So just to give two examples of mode of working on smart and sustainable urbanization. Thank you.
All very important and excellent points. And it's interesting that Ambassador Gillon also drew the distinction between cities in developed countries where a lot of the infrastructure is already built. Most of the population lives in these urban centers already, compared to, say, India, where 3/4 of our buildings are yet to be built. A lot of our infrastructure is yet to be built. Most of our population resides in rural centers. So it's important to also note this difference and also realize that given all of this, there's also a lot of scope for us to innovate, given that we're building new cities rather than just remodeling existing cities. But with that point, and Ms. Shariati made the point about looking at this as an not as a challenge but as an opportunity, I think that's important. And given the point that you raised, Mr. Soren and Camilla, on the fact that you can work from anywhere today, you have access to a lot of the similar services across many other cities, and access to knowledge, access to work, access to income. And I think, again, ending on that optimistic note that we must look at opportunities and not just the challenges. I think we are almost out of time in any case, so I'd like to bring this conversation to a close. But what an exceptionally enlightening conversation this has been for me. We covered so much ground so that I won't even try to summarize what we've talked about so far. But I'd just like to convey my heartfelt thanks to all of the brilliant speakers. Thank you so much for taking the time to discuss with us in this fireside chat. I'm sure that we're all leaving with that little bit more of that fire in our belly, given this inspirational chat. But thank you once again, and thank you to all of our listeners as well.
Thank you for this very excellent session. Thank you to each one of you for being a lighthouse for the Indian cities, citing the progress of your cities which you have been able to making your cities more safe, secure, inclusive, and more climate sensitive, more resilient, sustainable. May I request Ms. Chandrika Behel, the Managing Director of Exhibitions India Group, to kindly join us here on the dais to present the mementos. Thank you, Honorable Ambassador Gillon. Thank you. Thank you, Excellency Shariati. Thank you, Excellency Kane Kumar Kansan. Thank you, ma'am. Excellency Christensen Rai. And thank you to our dynamic moderator. Thank you, Ms. Mitra. So very key takeaways as we look into each one of them. We'll close with a group photograph. So we leveraging on technology towards making our cities smart and more resilient, but Smart cities is not just about technology, it is more about, again, the policies and the implementation, on being citizen centric, designing your cities with the and for the people as per the city DNA, the sharing with about the initiatives and women participation, climate action plans, areas of cooperation between India and their respective countries. Thank you very much.